Following an anonymous tip, Officer Daniels and his team approached an abandoned house near Ashton's Woods, expecting a big bust in the organized crime circuit. Instead, they were met by orphaned children playing in the debris, claiming they were living there. Daniels called for backup, realizing the situation required urgent intervention. Daniels and his team quickly put away their drawn weapons when they realized the old house they had just come barging into was not filled with hardened criminals who deserved to be arrested, but with children who looked a little worse for wear. They were clearly scared to death by the squad of heavily armed officers who had come in screaming and yelling. Daniels needed a moment to compose himself from this shocking discovery as well. How could this intel have been so wrong? The station had been 100% sure that this building was used as the base of operation, but it was clear that the only people using this place were minors who looked like they had gone through a really hard time. When the situation had calmed down a little bit, one of the children composed himself and stepped forward to talk to the officers. He comes up to Officer Daniels and introduces himself and Chen. He nervously asks the officer what they are doing here and why they scared them so much. He was worried they were getting arrested or something. Officer Daniels scrambled to try to comfort the child. He told Chen that this was all a mistake and that they had the wrong intel. If they knew there were children in this building, they would have never done anything like this. These words seemed to calm Chen and the other children down a bit, and the tense atmosphere started to relax a little bit. But Officer Daniels still had a lot of questions. He asked Chen what he and the other children were doing there. He looked around the room and could tell at least 15 children, whose ages probably ranged anywhere from 5 all the way up to 18. Daniels could see that this question hurt Chen a little bit, and he could not make eye contact as he stutteringly answered the officer. "We have nowhere else to go." Chen claimed that he and all the other children here were orphans, who nobody wanted and had no real place in this world. They had found each other over time and were working together as their only means of survival. They had recently found this abandoned house, and when they were sure nobody was ever coming here, they decided to stay here for as long as possible. It was a heartbreaking story that almost brought Officer Daniels to tears. He knew that these children needed help, and he was determined to give it to them. But a lot about this situation still did not make sense to him. He felt like there was something more going on here that Chen was not telling him about. But right now, he could not focus on that. He had a job to do. He and his team took all the children out of the house and loaded them in their cars and buses. Their intention was to transport them to the station where they could figure out what was best for them. They already called ahead so that colleges could make some arrangements with orphanages and child experts. It would not be easy to place 15 unknown children, but Daniels knew they had to try. The children were divided over the vehicles, and Chen ended up in the car with Daniels and his partner. The drive to their station was at least 20 minutes, which gave the officers some time to ask a couple more questions without a lot of curious ears. He first explained to Chen they had come to the house in the first place, and why they were so sure there were criminals inside. They had been tracking a spree of robberies and other small thefts, which had been rampant in the city for a long time. The people committing these crimes were clearly very experienced, as they always managed to get away without leaving a trace. Or at least, without leaving a big trace, because with a lot of research, the police really felt like they were closing in on the group. The means of operation were so similar that the officers knew the crimes had to be connected. Officer Daniels and his team reviewed the case files again, noticing patterns in the timings and methods used in each robbery. It was almost like the criminals were trained. This wasn't random, it was organized, and all trails seemed to lead back to one neighborhood. Daniels felt a chill. They were onto something big. They put up a giant map on which they pinpointed all the crime locations, It was clearly centered around the neighborhood. Officer Daniels, with a marker in hand, connected the dots, forming a pattern that was hard to ignore. Each line pointed toward a central point, an area that seemed unremarkable at first glance. But one house stood out. It was the abandoned house. Daniels's gut told him they were missing something crucial. And here, one house stood out. The abandoned house where they found the children. It stood out after talking to neighbors and neighborhood watch. These conversations revealed unexpected details. Residents mentioned seeing different cars at odd hours, not what you'd expect in front of an abandoned property. Officer Daniels took notes. Everything was starting to make sense, yet the puzzle wasn't complete. The story was deeper than it appeared. Apparently, they had seen a lot of cars coming and going to the house, from old vans to luxury cars, and inhabitants mostly spotted people leaving and taking things with them. Officer Daniels mulled over these details. The variety of cars and the secretive exchanges at the house painted a vivid picture. It wasn't just an abandoned house, it was a hub of activity. But what was being exchanged? And why here? It made so much sense that this place was a distribution center for stolen goods. A heat scan was the final nail in the coffin. When the officers reviewed the thermal images, they saw more than they bargained for. The supposedly empty house was a beacon of activity, with heat signatures all over. It was a clever cover-up. Using an abandoned house as a front was ingenious. Officer Daniels knew they were close to cracking the case wide open. On these scans, they saw a lot of people in the supposedly abandoned house. Officer Daniels and his team were stumped. The heat signatures were too numerous for a few squatters. Initially, they suspected a gang of criminals, but the reality was different. These were just kids, living in conditions no one would choose. The officers exchanged glances, realizing their investigation was taking a turn they hadn't anticipated. The pieces weren't fitting together as they expected. Officer Daniels wanted Chen to explain something. Mainly, he was curious about the cars that kept coming to the house. While driving to the station, Daniels asked Chen directly, keeping his tone neutral but firm. Chen looked out the window, then back at Daniels, gathering his thoughts. The officer waited patiently, knowing that this conversation could shed light on the situation. The answer to this question was crucial for understanding the whole picture. Chen actually had an explanation for this. He said these people were generous donors who brought food and other survival items to the house. According to him, the community knew about their plight and helped when they could. Daniels listened, processing this information. It was a plausible explanation, but it didn't entirely align with the neighbors' reports of items being taken away. This discrepancy needed to be addressed, but for now, Daniels kept listening. He did not understand why these people thought that only things were taken away. That had to be a mistake, Chen insisted. He explained that they sometimes had to sell items they couldn't use to buy what they really needed. It was a survival strategy. Officer Daniels nodded, considering this new angle. It made sense, but something still felt off. The story was coming together, yet gaps remained that couldn't be ignored. Officer Daniels started to get more skeptical, but kept a straight face. Things were not adding up. He needed to learn more about this. The drive to the station provided an opportunity to observe Chen and think about the next steps. Daniels was starting to question the whole situation. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but the image they formed was unexpected and complex. He prepared himself for the next phase of the investigation, knowing there was much more to uncover. All the children were brought to the station, where help was waiting for them. The officers, along with social workers, set up areas with toys and comfortable seating to make the children feel safe and cared for. They were given food, clean clothes, and medical checkups. The atmosphere was busy but supportive, as everyone worked to ensure the children knew they were in a safe place now, far from the uncertainty of the abandoned house. Officer Daniels excused himself by claiming he needed to do paperwork on this case, but in reality, he had a different plan. He grabbed his keys and headed back to his car, driven by a hunch that there was more to the story than what they had uncovered so far. His instincts told him that the key to solving the mystery lay back at the abandoned house. It was a gut feeling he couldn't ignore, compelling him to act. He drove back to the house alone. On the road, he called some of the neighbors who had witnessed the cars. As he navigated the familiar streets, his phone call revealed a consensus among the neighbors. They were adamant about their observations. This direct information was crucial, contrasting sharply with what Chen had told him earlier. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly beginning to fit together, yet the complete picture was still elusive. Most of them were very sure about what they had seen. According to the neighbors, things were taken from the house and not brought in. This contradicted Chen's story of donors and support from the community. Officer Daniels took meticulous notes during the calls, his mind racing with questions. The discrepancy between the accounts was glaring, and it hinted at a deeper layer of activities that had yet to be uncovered at the house. Daniels knew that Chen had been dishonest with him. The conviction grew stronger with every piece of conflicting evidence. He approached the abandoned house with a new sense of purpose, determined to find more clues. The quiet of the empty building seemed to mock his earlier ignorance. But Daniels was undeterred. He knew that somewhere within these walls lay the evidence that would unravel the true story of the children and their activities. They had put police tape all around the house, but no officer was there to enforce it. The yellow tape fluttered in the wind, a feeble barrier to the secrets inside. Officer Daniels hesitated for a moment, eyeing the perimeter. The absence of enforcement was odd, making the silence around the house more pronounced. It was as if everyone had forgotten about this place, except for those who couldn't, like Daniels. The door was still kicked in, and Daniels wanted to enter. But before he could step forward, a neighbor called his attention. He turned to see a woman waving at him from across the street. Her expression was serious, and she beckoned him urgently. Daniels, sensing the importance, crossed over to her. The neighbor's next words would add a new layer of complexity to the unfolding mystery. The woman lived on the other side of the road and wanted to warn Daniels. She had been watching the house, noticing more than the occasional passerby. She told Daniels that she had seen people entering the house after the police raid. Her details were precise. The visitors had arrived just 45 minutes after the officers left, slipping inside with a purpose that was now ominously unclear to Daniels. The people came in just moments after the police left, about 45 minutes ago, and had not left. Daniels suddenly realized the risk he was taking. This wasn't just a reconnaissance mission anymore. It could be a confrontation. The neighbor's information was a stark reminder of the unknown variables in play. Daniels thanked her, his mind racing. The situation was more dangerous than he had anticipated, but he couldn't turn back now. He still wanted to go into the house, but was very much on his guard this time. With his weapon drawn, he snuck into the house, moving silently through the broken doorway. Every sense was heightened, every shadow a potential threat. Daniels's training kicked in, guiding his steps through the familiar yet transformed interior. The risk was palpable, but the need for answers drove him forward, deeper into the heart of the mystery. He could quickly see that people had indeed been here. The house was different than how he left it. Furniture overturned, drawers emptied, and personal items strewn across the floor. The mess was a clear indicator of a frantic search for something, or perhaps an attempt to erase traces. Daniels stepped over scattered belongings, his mind racing. What were they looking for? And why turn the house upside down? Then he heard some sounds coming from upstairs. People were still here. Daniels tried to swallow his nerves, his heart thumping loudly against his chest. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't alone. Every police instinct he possessed screamed for caution. He steadied his breath, trying to quiet the sound of his own movements. The risk was real, but turning back wasn't an option. He had to find out who was upstairs. He silently went up the stairs, following the noise. The longer he listened, the more he was sure it was not just one person. Whispers, the shuffle of feet, something being moved, a chorus of stealthy activity. Daniels's approach was cautious, but determined. Each step took him closer to the source of the sounds, his every sense alert for the slightest hint of danger. This was the moment of truth. The sounds came from a bedroom upstairs. On his way there, Daniels saw the rest of the house was also raided. Drawers pulled out, closets emptied. The disruption was total. These people were looking for something, leaving no stone unturned. The chaos spoke volumes of their desperation. Daniels tightened his grip on his weapon, his resolve hardening. Whatever they were searching for, it was important enough to risk everything. He took a deep breath and kicked in the door with his weapon drawn. He scanned the room quickly, and indeed saw multiple people frozen in fear. The shock of the intrusion halted everything, a tableau of tension and surprise. Daniels's eyes darted around, taking in the scene, ready for any threat. But what he found in that room wasn't what he had expected. The confrontation was imminent, but the nature of it was about to challenge every assumption he had made. Daniels was shocked. These were also children, each with large backpacks and duffel bags slung over their shoulders. The sight momentarily froze him. He had expected many scenarios, but finding more kids in such a situation wasn't one of them. The tension in the air was palpable, with each child eyeing the officer, uncertainty and fear reflected in their eyes. The room was a mix of chaos and surprise, a momentary standoff between unexpected parties. Before he could tell them to not move or not fear him, they suddenly started to run and pushed the confused officer out of the way. The sudden movement caught Daniels off guard, his intentions of assurance cut short by their panic. It was a flurry of activity as the children scrambled towards the exit, their actions driven by a wild instinct to flee. Daniels, now recovering from the initial shock, realized he needed to act quickly. Daniels yelled at the kids, but they did not slow down. They were out of the front door in no time, their desperation palpable in the swift movements. Daniels went after them, his own footsteps heavy against the floor as he chased the fleeting shadows ahead. The chase was on, through the cluttered hallways and out into the open, where the evening light cast long shadows on their escape. The urgency was clear. He couldn't let them get away. They were slow with how heavy-packed they were. Suddenly, one kid gave his duffel bag to another kid and stopped running. The gesture was unexpected, a sacrifice for the other's escape. Daniels noticed the moment's hesitation in the group before they continued without their comrade. The lone child stood there, resigned, as if accepting a fate he knew was inevitable. The others vanished into the surroundings, leaving behind a tense silence between Daniels and the boy. Daniels caught up to him within seconds and grabbed a hold of him. The other children dispersed, their figures disappearing into the neighborhood's nooks and crannies. The boy didn't resist. His shoulders slumped under the weight of defeat. Daniels was firm, yet cautious, aware of the delicate situation at hand. The remaining child, now in custody, was a key to unraveling the mystery that had wrapped itself around the abandoned house and its unexpected inhabitants. Daniels demanded answers as to what they were doing. The boy stayed silent, a defiant look in his eyes. Without a word exchanged, Daniels knew he needed more support. He quickly radioed for backup, explaining the situation in terse details. The silent standoff between the officer and the boy highlighted the complexity of the night's events, with each waiting for the other to reveal more. But the silence remained unbroken, thick with unanswered questions. Officers needed to be on the lookout for these kids. Daniels relayed descriptions and last known directions. He emphasized the importance of retrieving the backpacks and duffel bags they carried. It was clear to him these kids were up to something significant. The urgency in his voice underscored the situation's gravity. Daniels wanted to unravel the mystery hidden within those bags, believing they held the key to understanding the night's chaotic turn of events. He brought the kid to his police car and then drove back to the station. The ride was enveloped in silence. The boy, probably only 12, staring out the window with an unreadable expression. Daniels attempted small talk, trying to pierce the boy's shell of silence, but to no avail. The city lights flickered past, casting shadows that played across their silent tableau, marking the distance to the station with every passing mile. Daniels was unsure of what to do. Before taking any further action, he decided it was crucial to talk to Chen. The connection between the children, the bags, and the night's events needed clarification. Daniels navigated the station's busy corridors, his mind racing with questions only Chen could answer. The desire to piece together the puzzle drove him, hoping Chen's insights would illuminate the darker corners of the mystery. The child was detained by another officer, and Daniels found Chen talking with one of the child service employees. The sight of Chen engaged in a seemingly calm discussion contrasted sharply with the night's tension. Daniels paused, observing, before interrupting. He needed to bridge the gap between what was known and what remained hidden. The upcoming conversation with Chen promised to shed light on the situation, potentially guiding Daniels towards the answers he desperately sought. Daniels told him he had a couple more simple questions which Chen was happy to answer. The atmosphere was tense, but hopeful, as Daniels aimed to clarify the night's events. His first question was straightforward, asking if all the children were accounted for by the officers during their initial visit. Chen's readiness to cooperate seemed genuine, a bridge towards understanding the complex situation that had unfolded since the discovery of the children. Chen confirmed this, stating everybody was present when the officers came by. But Daniels knew better. The boy they had just brought in was proof enough that Chen's account didn't hold up. The revelation was a significant shift in the investigation, indicating that the situation was far more complicated than initially believed. Daniels' realization that he was being lied to cast a new light on the investigation, deepening the mystery. Daniels stayed quiet and had the kid brought in. Chen's reaction was immediate and telling. He went white as a ghost. The confidence he had just moments ago vanished, replaced by a palpable sense of fear and surprise. He hadn't anticipated this turn of events, and his reaction spoke volumes. The room's atmosphere tensed further, the stakes suddenly much higher than before. Chen's facade had cracked, revealing the uncertainty beneath. Suddenly, the aim of the operation changed. Instead of being made comfortable, the children were put in interrogation rooms. This shift was not taken lightly, but deemed necessary to unravel the truth. With child experts guiding the process, the police aimed to ensure the children's safety and well-being, while also pressing for answers. The investigation had taken a sharp turn, focusing on uncovering the reality behind the children's stories and Chen's deception. Police asked them a lot of questions under the guidance of child experts, But the children held on to their story, a unified front in the face of growing scrutiny. This resilience was puzzling, raising more questions than answers. The situation was delicate, balancing the need for truth with the necessity of providing a safe environment for the children to express themselves. The investigation was at a crucial point, with every answer and silence adding pieces to the intricate puzzle. This was a great plan, as they ended up making 4 arrests. These individuals came to the house with money and no good alibi, expecting to carry out their business unnoticed. The police had cleverly laid their trap, and it snapped shut with precision. The arrests were a breakthrough, providing the officers with potential key players who might unveil the mysteries surrounding the house and its unexpected occupants. Daniels and other officers tracked their backgrounds and found that most of these had criminal records, or at least a shady past. This discovery wasn't entirely surprising, given the circumstances, but it added depth to their understanding of the situation. These were not random visitors. They were connected to the underbelly of the city, possibly linked to the chain of events that led the police to the abandoned house in the first place. They were put in interrogation rooms, and it didn't take the police long to piece together a picture of what happened in that house. Through a combination of skillful questioning and the unraveling of the visitors' defenses, a narrative began to emerge. The house, once thought to be merely an abandoned structure, was at the center of a complex web of activities that the children were deeply entwined in. After the first couple of confessions, some of the children also knew they had no choice but to talk. Now, the police finally had the full picture. The stories from the visitors and the children began to align, painting a vivid portrait of survival, desperation, and unintended consequence. It was a moment of revelation for Daniels and his team, who had been seeking clarity amidst the chaos of conflicting information. It turned out that these children were indeed orphans, abandoned by their parents and the system. But they were also very much responsible for the recent robbery wave in the city. Their actions were driven not by malice, but by necessity, a harsh reality of their struggle to survive. The confirmation of their involvement was a bitter pill for Daniels to swallow, highlighting the complex intersection of crime, vulnerability, and societal failure. The children, organized by Chen, had turned to crime to ensure their survival. Chen had convinced them that they had no other choice. Living on the fringes, with no one to turn to, the promise of a roof over their heads and a semblance of family bonded them to him. Chen's influence was profound, turning desperation into action. Together, they formed a unit, albeit one that tread on the wrong side of the law. They would steal anything of value and store it at the house where they lived together. This operation became their life, a routine of taking what they could to keep their makeshift family afloat. The house, once just an abandoned structure, turned into a repository of stolen goods. It was their base, their home, and the center of their operations. Each item stored away was a testament to their struggle and their bond. From here, Chen would sell the stuff to buyers who came to the house all day. They were making good money from this scheme. Chen acted as the middleman, the bridge between desperation and demand. The buyers, unaware or indifferent to the source of their purchases, provided the funds that kept the operation running. It was a lucrative business, one that exploited the talents and circumstances of the children under Chen's guidance. It was revealed that the 22-year-old Chen, who only pretended to be 17, was actually keeping more than half for himself while giving the rest of the children just enough to survive. This betrayal cut deep, exposing the exploitative nature of his leadership. Chen's facade of solidarity and protection was a mask for greed. The revelation of his true age and motives cast a new light on the operation, uncovering the depth of his manipulation. All the other children would end up in foster care, while Chen, and all the buyers the police could catch, are currently on trial. The dismantling of their operation marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. For the children, it was a chance at a new start, away from the shadows of their past actions. For Chen and the buyers, it was a reckoning, a moment to face the consequences of exploiting the vulnerable.